Hello there, episode 80 of the Middle-Aged Outlaws podcast. We're back. No pun intended, we are back. We both are middle-aged and both have bad backs. That's not like a tagline or anything. We've genuinely both got buggered backs. Anyway, Adam, how are you doing?
Apart from the back, all good. I haven't. I'm probably feeling better than I have done for a few days. I can move about without too much pain, but I still walk like a really, really old person. How about you?
Fine moving, not so fine, not really being mobile.
Okay.
So the key is to take lots of painkillers.
Yeah.
And sit on your arse. Apart from that, everything else all good. Let's address the elephant's beard in the room. Adam has got the most beautiful beard you have ever seen. He looks like he's been stranded in the North Pole for a year and he's just been found. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, the facial hair doesn't take long to grow. Like the head hair is patchy at best, but the facial hair just grows out. So usually I deal with it every sort of 4 to 6 weeks, but it hasn't been dealt with for a long time.
If we weren't doing the resurrection of Jake the Snake today, I would refer to you as Grizzly, but given the context, that's a bad idea.
I don't want any.
Nobody wants to be referred to in that sort of way. So this is episode 80. It should be episode 81. We have a lost episode. That's lowish that we now have a lost episode. But our TNA adventure, which started back in January, can you believe?
Oh wow!
Our TNA adventure is over. Started with Bound for Glory 2005, and finished with a bit of a damp squib, with us both in pain and unable to record for about a month. So we didn't manage to get round to reviewing Bound for Glory 2012. But reflecting on our TNA unexpected journey, if you will, it's safe to say it was a bit of a mixed bag. What's your positive reflections on our TNA journey?
Well, I remember, the sort of standout moment of getting into the Kurt Angle Samoa Joe stuff, which we then I think took a little detour just to enjoy a little bit more of. And why am I forgetting their names? Homicide and Hernandez and Conan.
LAX.
Yes. Yeah. The sort of emergence of them and seeing some of the stuff they did, which was really, really good.
Yeah, great. Absolutely. Tag team division, generally, I thought was a highlight. The likes of America's Most Wanted, LAX, More Set Machine Guns, Styles and Daniels when they were together as the tag team, even Beer Money. So I like the way they booked and treated their tag team division. Angle, like you said, I think over the span of the time that we watched, he'd been a babyface. He excelled as a heel. Yeah. As a nasty heel. Yeah. As well. The dick kicks always did it for me. That's just in my personal life, but from Angle as well, fantastic. Some of the X Division was good.
Yeah.
I think we liked, and even some of the gimmick matches that almost they sort of lazily fell into, it felt.
Yeah.
But even some of them were pretty good.
Yeah.
And the women's division, I thought, had its own little highlights as well. Some good wrestlers, some of them.
Yeah, it had moments. There's a few things that felt like started off really well, and then they kind of, I don't know if they just didn't quite know how to make the next steps and maybe dropped the ball a little bit with some of it. And I think some of the women's division stuff would fall into that category. But we saw some good talents. We saw sort of an emergence of Gail Kim, both as a performer and as like a valet type role.
And as someone that sits within our hearts.
Yes, of course. And we saw Awesome Kong emerge.
I loved Awesome Kong. I thought she was great.
Yeah, and then there was also, I forget her name, I think she's in TNA these days. that came in as a really talented wrestler, and just seemed a little bit lost in the shuffle in terms of the matches they were putting her in.
Tara, no. Mickey
No,
James, no.
Mickey James, yeah, that's what I mean. I assume because of painkillers, all names have just escaped my memory.
I thought you referred to Mickey James and having some sort of painkiller issue. Don't
That's
come
all
after
me.
us with your lawyers, Nick
All me.
Aldis.
All me. Sorry, everyone.
Cool. Probably, I mean, given the sort of theme of this episode, it's probably best not to think about the negatives. We're all about the positives here after watching DDP working his magic. But would there be any sort of negatives that you would have wanted to highlight from our little journey?
I think I started to get a little bit grated with some of the Monsters Ball stuff. I can't say I was all in on that from the start, but I'm not massively big into the sort of violent matches these days. I think I've changed as I've got a bit older. Um, I I was all for, you've got a superstar, so you use him as such. Sting being there and being prominent, but I felt like we went through a cycle where it felt like he was in the title match every year, which felt a little bit overkill. But again, we're watching one show a year, which maybe makes it a bit worse and seem a bit more Sting overload. So there were a couple of things that I would mention.
Yeah, I agree with him. I think there's just a little bit of wasted opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There, I think they had all the ingredients, particularly once Angle was up and running. I think they had all the ingredients to really make a bit of a wedge there with WWE's audience, and it's disappointing to see things like the Road Dogg stuff with McMahon and Triple H and all that sort of stuff. The digs at WWE was, I think you're always going to get that sort of thing, but I feel like some of the stuff they did was things that you've seen WCW fall into and AEW more recently fall into. That it'd be good if they just concentrated on their universe sort of thing.
Yeah. It seemed a bit desperate at times, and they had so much talent and a lot of good in-ring product that you're kind of taking the spotlight off that with some of the nonsense they were doing.
Yeah, agreed. But generally, a fun and enjoyable little journey. So much so that it's sent us out of the ring and made us stop watching wrestling altogether.
Yeah.
and moved us into a little documentary phase. So that's what we're going to concentrate on for the next few episodes at least.
Yeah, fun.
So this week we have started with 2018's Andre the Giant, which was produced by HBO, and it seemed to have quite a lot of agreement and work with WWE. I don't know if it's WWE Studios type thing. And the resurrection of Jake the Snake from 2015. So we'll talk Andre first, and then we'll talk through Jake. I dare say we've probably got more to say about Jake and that whole thing than we will Andre. But let's just talk through Andre the Giant first. First of all, did you enjoy it?
I did. So I'd seen the Jake one before. I hadn't seen the Andre one before, so I knew I was kind of going into this first time viewer. And there's a lot, we as WWE guys, we kind of know Andre the Giant from some early WrestleMania appearances, but what I didn't know an awful lot about was background and pre WWE, and I found that pretty interesting. So I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good watch, quite emotional at times, but very, very interesting, I thought.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. So the synopsis here is pretty basic. A look at the life and career of professional wrestler Andre Roussimoff, who gained notoriety in the 1980s as Andre the Giant. And it started out with us in the French village that he grew up with, speaking to his brothers and his sister, I think, as well. Interesting to see how much they resembled him, but obviously not in stature, but in facially. I found that really interesting. And there was a great thing, some pictures where they showed Andre as like a 15, 16-year-old. They talked about him playing rugby
Yeah.
football, but even then he looked ginormous.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there's a picture of him. I think is it as a 19-year-old they show him, and he's in a wrestling ring, and he's like a beanpole, like a lamppost, but he's like towering over someone at 19-year-old. I was just thinking about when I was a kid, 15, 16, playing rugby and football, and can you imagine? It'd be like playing Jonah Lomu on steroids, sort of thing.
It's so hard to because all we'd really known him as was a guy who's in a wrestling ring, surrounded by other big guys. So they're not as big as him, but they're big guys. And I think it was maybe seeing him pictured with, younger people, normal people that don't have the sort of physique and size and height as your average wrestler. It really stood out just how big he was.
Yeah, it really
terrifying.
did. It's that thing of going to see the NFL in real life, and you watch it on telly, and you're like, he's a big guy. But he's a big guy compared to other big guys.
Yeah.
You see them fresh with your eyes, you're like, my God. Like, thinking about Ndamukong Suh, I remember seeing him for the first time and being like, wow, that's ridiculous. Like, he's so big.
Yeah.
It sort of jumps into territory stuff, which I really found interesting, and it's touching on what you're talking about there. Like, we've known him, WrestleMania 3 sort of stuff and onwards, really. I've never seen footage of him in the territories or anything like that. They talk about him, I think, starting out in the Midwest, they talk about. To see him walk out the ring, and he's obviously, like, there's no limping, there's no stiffness, there's no sort of labouring. He's just walking, and he's smooth, and he's obviously fit, and it's just like, oh my God, it's like seeing a Sasquatch or something.
Yeah, because it looked from... I think my only disappointment, and you have to take that with these kind of shows because they can only go on so long, was that there wasn't a bit more, footage and talk about him working his way through the territories. They mentioned Japan as well, and I would have liked to have seen more footage because what they did show, I think you've really hit on it there. He was quite agile for his size, and what a prospect that is in terms of being able to watch him in the ring because he's huge, but he could move. And we only really got to see him when he was struggling with that. He was struggling with the movement. It did make me think, and it's such a, I feel like an asshole even thinking it, but I like watching thinking, what a shame we didn't get that match with Hogan when Andre could move, because it was iconic as it was, but imagine what it could have been. That's kind of what went through my mind.
Yeah. When would the main event have been? Remember, we watched the main event. That was like 88 or something, was it? Or was it not as far forward as that?
So was that in the lead up to Mania 3? Or was that after?
I think it was after. I was just thinking, like, then he was pretty laboured then, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He wasn't for moving very much.
Yeah. Just seeing if I can find out when it was. Yeah. And again, watching this, 88. Yeah.
Was it 88? So where's that in comparison to like Mania 3? Is that about 86, 87?
Mania 3 was, I think, 87.
Aye. Yeah. It's a shame. You're right. Like, definitely the memories that I have of Andre is like Mania 3, tagging with Haku, being part of the Heenan family, and going about in like a giant blazer type thing, and like moving dead slow.
Yeah.
I really love the stuff. I found this documentary frustrating. Of course, Hogan's going to be in it.
Yeah.
Of course he is. He's going to be front and centre. We got about halfway through it, and I thought, are we building to Mania 3 as the sort of pinnacle of this documentary? Of course, Vince McMahon's going to be in it. Yeah. But it just puts us, as soon as you see them, both of them, because everything coming out of Hogan's mouth is going to be just absolute nonsense. And just the sight of Vince was enough.
It's quite stomach turning now, isn't it? Seeing Vince, and yeah, Hogan's. I think all the stuff Hogan's invented in his mind over the years, it just makes you immediately question everything that's being said. There's actually we'll get there when we get to the Mania 3 stuff. But I was wondering how genuine he was being. They talk quite a bit about him, arriving in WWE, and he's sort of been this in the territories, which I think was perfect. And we've talked about how much we probably would have enjoyed following the territory days, where they talked about he could go somewhere for like 6 or 7 weeks, and he's this thing that you just don't see. He's
special
unique.
Attraction.
Yeah, and then before it gets tiresome, he's moved on. He can go to the next territory, and I think he was generally always a babyface, which they talk about, I think, quite intelligently in the documentary, because your babyface you want to get sympathy on, and how hard it is to get sympathy from a 7-foot monster.
Yeah.
But Andre could do it. He could get the sympathy of the audience, and he was quite often, by the sounds of it, used in like battle royal situations and things like that. And then as we go towards WWE, it's pretty clear, like they're changing the narrative. It becomes the guy's never been beat, and he's kind of. It almost feels like he's there to put some, not shine on Hogan, but give him the sort of respect. Which
he's the giant for Hogan to conquer, sort of thing.
Although initially it's like he's got his back. Like they're talking about how I think he's in the changing room when Hogan wins the belt from Iron Sheik, and
That's
he's like
right.
opening champagne and pouring it on him
That's
and
right.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because there was no perception at the point in time that Andre would want to be champion or anything like that. He was there and he was a big star, and the way a lot of them talking about him was he was the biggest star. He was known everywhere.
Uh-huh.
But obviously he's not your guy that you're gonna put the title on and move into a new era with, effectively. But yeah, I quite enjoyed seeing or hearing some of the stories. It's Hogan, so you do wonder, is it all genuine? Like he's talking about, and I've read this somewhere in a book about issues Andre had with Big John Studd.
Yes, I found that really interesting.
Yeah, like apparently annoyed Big John Studd would step over the top rope because that was Andre's move, and things like that. And there's obviously, like, Big John Studd's a big guy, but Andre's bigger than him. He's when you see them next to each other, he's pretty significantly bigger than him. But Andre didn't take to him, and then the stories about him not taking to Savage because of all the baby oil.
Yeah, I wonder what you thought about that. Because it was Hogan and Savage isn't there to defend himself.
Yeah,
obviously.
I had heard it. Something I saw, and I think it was the Genius, Randy Savage's brother, that was talking about, and apparently Savage saw the baby oil as kind of one of his things. So Andre had basically asked him not to wear it when they were having their matches, but Savage was like, well, I can't not wear it, for one. That's weird. I wear it all the time. And Andre didn't take to him because of that.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's funny. Two interesting personalities. It sounds like Andre, the way that Hogan talked about it, he did a lot of toying with people. Maybe I'll sell for you this week, maybe I won't, maybe I'll work for it. They showed you some footage of him and the Sheik in the ring, and according to Hogan, he was just throwing the Sheik about and basically doing what he wanted with him.
Yeah.
It's hard to debate because that is what it looked like, but again, it's Hogan. So
yeah, and I think they do. There's more than one talking head that touches on the fact that, and this I'm sure will be real. If Andre doesn't want to do something, he's not going to do it.
No.
And it very much sounded like, as we get a bit nearer WrestleMania 3, Vince wasn't going to tell him to do something that he didn't want to do. So you had to talk Andre into whatever it is that you wanted to do. And then I'm trying to remember if Jake was Jake a talking head in this? Because he's told some stories, certainly on his podcast, about Andre.
I was listening to Jake on Joe Rogan today. I was just going to say that he had some good stories about Andre on there as well.
Yeah, and may have been from other sources. I've heard him talking about him, but he's also said, I think respect was a big thing by the sounds of it. You go into a locker room as a new guy, and the expectation is you go around and shake everyone's hand, and you potentially, by the sounds of it, hand Andre some beer or something like that. That's
Some
kind of
peanuts.
something that's expected. And then we go into Tim White talking as well, because Tim White obviously ended up very well-known referee in WWE, ended up being very close to Andre, but it sounded like they had a little bit of a bumpy start as well when Tim White was just went into the locker room, and Andre didn't think he should be there.
It's interesting. I just think of Tim White, obviously, as referee. That's all you think of. You don't think of like people breaking in to the business, and he just talked about, like you say, just wandering in to a locker room, which is a bit like frowned upon, obviously, and Andre screamed at him to get out, and I think he thought he was joking. I mean, if this gigantic guy's screaming at you to get out, I would just be leaving. Like,
oh yeah, I'm probably just walking out of the company.
I'm never coming back.
Thanks for the opportunity, but I'll be away. They were talking about him, like his celebrity as well for a bit, like appearances in the $6 Million Man TV show, which was a big show.
I said Sasquatch earlier. That he was literally dressed as a Sasquatch. That was brilliant. I loved that.
And we're talking before there was a lot of CGI capability and things like that. So if you need some sort of massive monster, Andre's the guy you'll look at and think, well, he can be the guy.
Yep.
And him appearing on David Letterman, hanging out with and becoming quite friendly with Arnold Schwarzenegger and things like that. So I found that quite interesting. I sort of probably naively in my mind think that sort of celebrity association with wrestling probably started with Hogan, but it sounds like it's been there before that, just maybe not widespread.
Yeah. In that bit where they were talking about fame, they said he tried out for the Redskins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's unbelievable. I wonder what position. Has to be a lineman, sure, not like aye, has to be.
Yeah, must have been. Yeah, on one side of the ball would be a lineman. And I think Vince was talking, much as, I think he was almost acknowledging we do exaggerate height and weight and things like that, but he believed he was legitimately over 7 foot, Andre. So big guy.
They talked about his relationship with women. The three people you would not want to hear anybody talk about women. Flair was in this documentary for all of 5 seconds.
Yeah, there was one comment, basically.
One thing he said, he wore a size 24 ring, brother. What else do I need to tell you? And then does this really creepy laugh, which is just...
Then he said something about the shoes, didn't he? And then that was him.
That's right. And he also said that somebody told him that he had an extra row of teeth. So whenever he was talking to him, he would try and look up in his mouth. Anyway, Flair mentions the feet, the size of the ring. Hogan says, "Oh, the girls loved him, brother. I'm not interested." Fast forward, and then Vince was like, "No thanks." We get some good stories about drinking. I think we've always heard these stories about how much he could put away. Mm-hmm. Jake told a really good story on Joe Rogan where he was he'd been told he was designated driver when he was just breaking in as a referee in the late 70s, being told that he would be Andre's driver, and they were driving 80 miles down the road, and Andre told him to get 2 cases of beer, and he was like, all right, he must want some beers for the room sort of thing, and Jake had to stop for like 2 or 3 P's on the way down the road, and he kept saying to him, do you not need? No, beer. Not need? No. And they got to wherever it was they were going, 80 miles down the road. They drunk off 48 bottles and still never been at the toilet. And Jake was like, I don't mind somebody out drinking me, but how could I not need a piss?
I think it was maybe another Flair comment, and Flair's another. I think you take most things he says with a pinch of salt. I think he said he saw Andre drink 106 beers or something like that in a night.
That's right.
And he was like, you had other guys talking about, he would drink, a case of wine and then, 20 beers and stuff like that, and you're like, oh, wow, like it's unfathomable For me, like I'm well past my drinking peak.
No, with that beard, you could drink whatever you want. You could drink like paint thinner with that beard.
But yeah, like I used to think I can go out and drink like 10 beers or something like that, and then you're like, oh, he's apparently tucking away, you know, 3 times that plus a case of wine and things like that. It's crazy.
Unfathomable. And they're saying it like it's not like he got drunk. It was sometimes drinking just for the amount of pain that he was in,
Yeah,
which is which is really sad. And
yeah,
that came through more and more as the documentary went on and as his career and life went on.
mhm.
There's something quite not right about Vince. To me, Vince talking about how much pain he was in. I'm not saying he was reveling in it. Of course he wasn't, and he talked about having a really close relationship with him.
Mhm.
But then playing devil's advocate, like you're the one basically exploiting that man.
Yeah, yeah. Because the documentary took a turn. It sort of for a while everything was a little bit, he's getting some success, he's getting some notoriety, and then they start talking about drinking because of the pain, and then they start talking about him being like mocked by people in airports and called a freak and things like
Yeah.
that. And I think I was fully buying that because I think Tim White was the one talking about a lot of that and the
Yes.
sadness that came with it for Andre, and also just the physical demands of traveling. Like I find it difficult, traveling for long journeys and things like that. I'm like aches and pains when I get out of a car or off a train, or I hate flying anyway, but off a plane. You imagine a guy the size of Andre, how like nothing can be comfortable.
Nah.
It's not. I think there's an interview where he's talking about at a point where he's talking about there's special things created for smaller people. There's special things created for ill people and things like that. But what there isn't is for the incredibly large people. It's just not really catered for. So he just had to make the best that he could of
That's
the
sad.
situations. Yeah.
There's the two different aspects. There was the thing about pain, like you say, and then there's the thing like hotel rooms and cars being too small for him. Jake said they had to go to the toilet in the bath, because the toilets were too small in his hotel room. And then there's that thing of like never being able to hide and never being able to be anonymous.
Yeah.
I think it was Tim White that was saying that he'd told him he would just kill just to be you for a week, just to have that, just to be able to go about my day without somebody wanting to touch me, somebody wanting a picture, somebody pointing and laughing, and I think it was Mean Gene's talking about him getting upset and crying and things like that. And in that day and age that Andre was working, the 80s and 90s, like nobody's going to listen to a giant talking about being sad because people are laughing at him, are they?
Yeah, and it's sort of right at the point where it's talking about how how bad things are, and they talk through the fact he found out that he has this illness, but he didn't want treatment for it. So I can't remember what the illness was actually called. It's sort of, I think, referred to as gigantism. But there's a proper term for it.
Medical term for it, yeah.
But he felt like if he got the treatment, he wouldn't be able to be a wrestler.
That was heartbreaking to hear that.
Yeah.
He was worried about the impact it'd have on his career.
Yeah. Yeah.
To hear that was... I've always assumed that whatever made Andre the way that he was irreversible. Not irreversible. Yeah, irreversible.
Yeah.
And they weren't saying that they could... It's not like they're going to shrink him, but they could say that they could help it to stop.
Yeah.
Or slow it down.
Slow it down, yeah.
Because it sounded like he was always growing. Everything was always growing.
Yeah.
Which is, again, unfathomable. But for him to say he was concerned about what that would do to his career, again, points straight back to McMahon.
Yeah. 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 Because we sort of transitioned from all that to Andre being in a pretty bad place. and we get all of a sudden it's felt a little bit jarring to me, but all of a sudden the documentary turns to talking about Vince's takeover and going, national and things like that, and buying out the territories or forcing them out of business, and WrestleMania and that kind of thing.
You kind of feel like, oh God, I've heard this too many times.
Yeah. I understand why they had to touch on it, and then they're talking about potentially what that could mean for Andre moving forward. And I think they sort of all of a sudden they sort of cut in a little bit to they definitely talk at that point about Andre being an attraction, a babyface, and endorsing Hogan as the man.
It kind of transitions into a bit of a Hogan fest for a little while, doesn't it?
There's a little brief, there's Princess Bride chat, which we definitely, we talked about for, was it wrestling? Movies
5.
featuring wrestlers. And they had the director and I think, was it Billy Crystal, one of the stars, talking about Andre on set, and maybe Robin Wright as well, I think, was there. Who was just one of the stars.
I really enjoyed that bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is it's a massive guy, obviously, but they're talking about what he was struggling with physically at the time, where it was like there's supposed to be a fight scene and he was really struggling to do that. There's supposed to be a moment where Robin Wright drops and he catches her, but he physically wasn't going to be able to do it. They were going to have to attach cables and things like that. And I think Billy Crystal talking about it being, great, but there was a sadness to him about the condition he was in and things like that. And the director also told a story about him being drunk, but incredibly, by the sounds of it, incredibly friendly and sort of jovial at those moments in time. I like that set. That was a bit different. It's kind of you hadn't heard before. It was all new.
Yeah, I liked getting that different perspective, non-wrestling perspective. Every single one of them. Rob Rayner, like you said, there was Carrie Elwes, Billy Crystal, Robin Wright. They were smiling and they talked about how what a lovely man he was and all that sort of stuff. And it was quite nice. Nice wee sort of, like you say, a bit different. We get a whole. There's some interesting things here that Hogan was talking about, because we do go on a bit of a Hogan explosion, and on like national TV and all that sort of stuff. Hogan seemed to be claiming, tell me if I've picked this up wrong, that appearing as Thunderlips in Rocky 3 completely changed the wrestling business.
Yeah, I think that was his implication, yeah.
We also, what else did Hogan, Hogan talks about, essentially Hogan's talk about, I took a little bit from this guy, I took a little bit from this guy. He's essentially saying, I took all the best bits from all the big guys, and that's what Hulk Hogan became.
Yeah,
telling on himself a little bit.
There was a moment, like I think we're heading towards it, that I found really, really like this leapt out at me, where I think it's Vince talking, and he's basically saying Andre's contacted him and says he's done, and then like not just with wrestling but with everything. And the way Vince was talking was like Andre was just going to, I think by the sounds of it, go back to the ranch and just wait to die. That sounded like that's where he was at. And that this was, I think by the sounds of it, something you've been picking up on as we've gone, this was the moment where I was like, fuck you, Vince, where he's like then immediately selling him on the idea of, Hogan v Andre at Mania 3. And I'm like,
yes. Imagine, Andre, 93,000 people. Forget your dream of living in agony, in solitude. Think of the money you can make for me. That was a bit like what it was like. It felt despicable. He was grinning when he was saying it. It was horrible. Obviously, we're seeing Vince from a totally different perspective these days.
Yeah.
But when you look at it like that, it was kind of horrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It felt really uncomfortable. Like he had absolutely no... He just wanted to use him. That's how it came across. And he's talked about his relationship with him, but it did not come across like he cared about the person here at all. It was like, I need this to get my dream of what this main event needs to look like.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. There was something Hogan was. This is maybe jumping forward a little bit, but I was putting two and two together and getting five. But they were talking about WrestleMania 3 and on whether Andre was going to play ball with Hogan, essentially, and teasing Hogan kind of, and like whether he was going to play ball or not. And again, this is Hogan, and he's basically narrating the WrestleMania 3 match, but Hogan's essentially saying Andre called everything in the ring. Hogan had no idea what was going to happen. He'd given him a script backstage. He had no idea if he was going to stick to it or not. And I was thinking, is it Andre's fault that Hogan was the way that he was? Is he responsible for him political and everything?
Yeah, because some of the stuff about I was believing that Andre was teasing and maybe not giving away what he was going to do. Tim White was talking about it as well. Every time Hogan came in the room, Andre was like, "Don't worry about it, boss," or something like that. And Hogan's like going to Vince, but is he gonna do what we've planned? And Vince is like, basically, by the sounds of it, that's up to Andre, and it, I suppose. I think I believe elements of this. I do believe he was keeping him in the dark, just trying to maybe keep him on his toes. But yeah, I was immediately like, when Hogan talked about mapping out a whole match, and they were showing like pictures of what looked like a script, and I was thinking, is this to try and prove this is real? But Hogan would never have struck me as a guy that would have mapped out an entire match. And then he's talking about his sort of delight as Andre is doing the things that he'd mapped out. But he did say, I think, that what they hadn't mapped out was the finish, because Hogan says that he had said, if Vince wants Andre to go over, I'll put Andre over. That was what Hogan said. I don't believe that.
He had his fingers crossed behind his back.
Yeah, we did no show at the event. But yeah, the way they sort of run into the finish, I think, sounded from what Hogan was saying, like Andre was calling it on the fly. He was like, slam, and then leg drop and all that. Now, they must have known that he was going to try a slam. So they must have known that right off the bat, because he does the failed attempt early on.
That's right.
With where Andre falls on him, and it's like the dubious, did he get his shoulder up and things like that they sort of ran with for a little while. And you don't, with a guy that Andre's size, obviously he can cooperate or he cannot cooperate, but would it be a given that Hogan could physically slam him if they hadn't, considered that or tried it before?
Yeah, I don't know. Jake talked about that a little bit on Joe Rogan. He was in the ring with him, and Andre shouted slam, and Jake said he was like, yeah, sure, no problem. And Andre was like, slam. And he said, all I had to do is put my hand under there, and his hips were up.
Yeah. So yeah, like, I think, out of the match, Andre just seems like a very good guy. He has done the business. He has, I think, put his own physical health to one side to do what he thought needed to be done for the company, and for Hogan to become, he's already the man, but to add another layer to how much he's
a stamp,
the man.
Isn't it?
Yeah. I quite liked they showed, I've seen it so many times, but when they showed Andre turning up with Heenan on Piper's Pit, there's something that I don't think I'd really picked up on before. He does like Hogan's doing what are you doing with this guy? And Andre challenges him, then grabs the shirt and rips it off him, and the crucifix, I think, comes off, and there's a scratch on his chest and all that. But like, the moment Andre challenges him, I hadn't really noticed Jesse Ventura's there, and he is massively selling what's just happened with just off to the side going and stuff like that. I like that.
Brilliant. I think you said it takes a bit of a dark. Certainly after we get into Mania 3, it sort of starts winding down. We start talking about the obvious deterioration of his body. They talk about going into a lot more of a sort of part-time role with first working with Haku and then just sort of being around the ring. Yeah. So much. He just seems to be in so much pain. There's bits there about Vince saying that their relationship deteriorated. Andre accused him of using him, and like how can you possibly watch this documentary and think,
Yeah.
no, he's out of line there, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then we progressed him. I think he flew home around about 1993. Flew home. His dad was unwell,
Yeah.
and it's from here we progress into Andre being found in his hotel room a few days after his dad had passed. Poor Tim White's breaking his heart talking about it.
Yeah.
He's
46.
46, yep. And Tim White broke my heart. He says, I just wish I'd been with him. I just wish he hadn't been on his own.
That was devastating. Like that.
That's just a proper friend.
It came across as probably the most real thing that was said in all this.
Yeah.
Like, he seemed devastated that Andre was on his own when it happened. I'm like, oh, God.
They really do, in times, paint him as a sort of a gentle giant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As stereotypical as it is. Right at the very end there, we hear again from the family. And I really liked hearing the brother say to, it was almost like you're saying, like, all the stuff he did was great, but to me, he was just my brother. And I loved him. And I thought that was nice. And I would probably I would have liked it if the documentary delved into that a little bit more, but it's obviously not the selling point of an Andre the Giant documentary.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, a sad end, obviously. You know where it's going, but a sad end. Sad to hear about the level of pain he was in.
Yeah.
But also, just quite marvelling to see the early footage of him as a young man moving so freely, and pretty terrifying, really.
Yeah. Yeah. It got me, especially towards the end and the Tim White stuff, it got me emotionally. Yeah.
It's a good one. I'd recommend it. I'd recommend it for fans. I think it's a wrestling documentary, more than it is anything else, but enjoyable nonetheless.
Yeah, agreed.
So we shall move on to Jake Roberts and the resurrection of Jake the Snake from 2015.
Okay, so the synopsis I found was quite brief, but we're obviously going to go into a lot more detail, so that's fine. A fallen professional wrestling superstar battles his past demons in a struggle to reclaim his life and the family that has given up on him. So we know right from the start the fallen wrestler is Jake the Snake Roberts, and we sort of start off the documentary by there's a lot of talking heads talking about what Jake was to them as a wrestling performer, and obviously, I think we've touched on it multiple times in the discussions we've had about his promos, his psychology, his sort of intelligence for the wrestling business, and you've got some real big hitters. There's Stone Cold Steve Austin, there's Jericho, there's Mean Gene, Ted DiBiase, got Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Jim Ross, and we've got DDP, who's obviously going to go on to become a pretty prominent part of what we're talking about here. And I really I always like this, but when people pick up on it, and it's picked up on very early in this documentary about the sort of slow, quiet, methodical nature of the promos, and he's not really raising his voice, but it sounds so menacing and sinister. And I think he references at a point that he learned at a young age. If you talk quietly, people will lean in and listen.
I love that. Yeah. It was Jericho that mentioned it. Yeah, I think it's one of those things. Like, for some, this is a bit of a tangent, but for somebody who coaches young kids football, I find myself raising my voice quite a lot. Not in a angry way, but in a try to get my point across way.
Yeah.
And watching that today, and I had training tonight, and I was trying to adopt the Jake the Snake sort of way of talking to them. It's an interesting thing, I think, for teachers and things like that. It must be something.
I was wondering if it would work with young kids or if they would just completely ignore you.
Yeah, no 10-year-olds that are interested in doing the gritty and all that, and not listening to you now.
We go into some of the sort of personal stuff quite quickly about so Jake's got kids that he just doesn't seem to have had much contact with, certainly in the more recent years. And then there's some really sad stuff spotlighting kind of where Jake's at now. and we see
Oh,
some of the appearances.
that
There's like,
footage of him in the ring where he's drunk is horrible. That's no. He
it's,
apparently, what's the word? Sort of like exposed himself.
yeah,
They don't show that
yeah.
in the documentary, I don't think, but he
No,
exposed
they
himself.
didn't show it, but there's talking heads from it'd be a small company, an indie company that have booked him to appear, and obviously you put Jake Roberts on your banner, you're going to get some interest, and then he's like uncooperative in the ring, and then even when they try to get somebody to do a run in, and I think the promoter's talking about all he wants is just give the guy a DDT, and
all the
then
fans
it'll
want
all
to
be
see.
fine.
Yeah,
Yeah, and he's not doing it. He's refusing to doing it, and he seems to be shouting and slurring about people not respecting him and things like that. And then the promoter, I think it was, talked about him exposing himself, and yeah, I mean, what a situation for a promotion that you imagine are counting every single penny that they get.
yeah.
I think that was 2008.
Was it really? God.
Yeah, which I mean, it doesn't seem that long ago. And we kind of we flash then to 2012, and DDP, who was considering Jake to have been a friend, a mentor, a guy that helped him along trying to find his way in the business. He obviously has enough concern about the situation Jake's got himself into that he wants to go and see him and see what he can do to help him.
At this point, DDP yoga is established.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that Jake had trained DDP, did you?
Yeah, not until I watched. So I'd seen this before, but I couldn't remember it all that clearly, and things were coming back to me as I watched. But I think the first time I watched this was the first awareness I had of that.
So I think that's something that DDP is obviously hugely thankful for and respects.
Mm-hmm.
Jake, like you say, talks about him being his mentor. I don't think that would have mattered really to DDP or not. I think he would have still done everything that he's done here.
Yeah.
Out of respect and just his general personality, which blew me away watching this. I genuinely was blown away by DDP in this.
It kind of took me back to, do you remember when they had DDP in WWE and he was being like this ultra positive guy and he would do the big smile. Yeah. And then he was, I think, trying to help Christian, and Christian had tantrums and turned on him and things like that. But like they've obviously, I think, picked out on a bit of his character where he is an incredibly positive person. And kind of ran with it. It
always seems so random because all we known of DDP was like Bang and fighting NWO and Diamond Cutter, and just like, what is Vince doing with DDP? Like, why is he doing it?
Yeah. So yeah, DDP, like you touched on, he's had a bit of success establishing and creating the DDPY, DDP Yoga, and wants to see what he can do to try and help Jake. And Jake, I think it said he'd retired about a year before this, and he seems really down on himself. Like there's the situation he's in, there's the circumstances, and I think there's a feeling that the business has moved on. He's kind of been forgotten, but he doesn't have really anything in his life to motivate him. And he's, clearly got some addiction problems, drugs, alcohol, all that. But
physically, he's in terrible shape.
Yeah,
he's really overweight, but he's also, I think he's struggling to walk, basically.
Yeah, so I think quite early on we see DDP trying to get him to kneel in like basically a yoga position, a yoga starting position, and he can't go on his knees. He's having to get up off his knees after a few seconds every time because of the pain it's causing him.
Disclaimer: I probably couldn't do that right now, and neither could you, I would imagine.
No, but we'll get back to maybe we'll do some DDPY. We get a bit of info about it's all been covered a lot more, but Jake's abuse, stepmother abuse, bad relationship with his father as well, who it's a horrible situation. He clearly felt belittled by him, not supported by him, but he was desperate to try and make something of himself, to try and prove his father wrong.
Proper hurts my heart to hear him talk about that stuff.
Yeah.
I think JR, you've read JR's books as well. It's a similar thing with JR, where he just wanted that recognition from his dad.
Yeah, it's really sad. Like, thankful to have always had very supportive family, but obviously that's not been the case for everyone. It's very sad. DDP, like, I messaged you about this because it comes across so early in this documentary how easy it would actually be for DDP to seem interested in making a documentary and insincere and, you know, almost borderline exploitative, even if you weren't meaning to be.
And over the top positive and the brand in your face. There's you get the impression DDP could give a fuck about there being a documentary.
Yeah. Like, a little bit more, you get the impression, is it Steve, the other guy?
Who I
think is directing the documentary.
Yeah.
He's a bit more invested, I think, in there being a documentary. But yeah, DDP so early comes across as so sincere about
amazing.
How he just wants to help him and repay him for everything he did for him and just get him into a better situation.
Even you saying that sounds insincere if you've not watched it.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to describe. Like I say, he couldn't care about documentary. He's very nonchalant with how he comes across on camera, I think.
Yeah. So quite early on, we get some, like, so you've talked about seeing him as a physical mess. I think he's talking a little bit about how long he's been clean of drugs and stuff like that, but turns out that's maybe not true. And I think he acknowledges he does have an alcohol problem. And DDP makes the suggestion that Jake comes back with him and moves in with him, and he is going to help him, and it's going to be so much easier if he's in the house and on site. And I mean, Jesus, even just that, you're opening up your home to someone that you know has a drug and alcohol problem.
You're opening the door to chaos, basically.
Yeah.
They talk about his house being the accountability crib, I think they call it.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And that accountability thing is something that is, like, heavily leaned on in this documentary. DDP is Jake's conscience on his shoulder.
Yes.
I think. You would never think that Jake is the mentor here and DDP is the student.
Yeah.
Jake clearly looks up to DDP as much as DDP looks up to Jake.
It's pretty stark early on because you know early on there's going to be like a fall. You know, this isn't going to be plain sailing addiction. Not an easy thing for people to deal with, and I think within a week, Jake's fallen off the wagon and he's drinking, and
the airport on his own.
Yeah, the way, like, I really liked the way DDP was speaking to him. Like, it was a, you know, I'm not listening to your shit. I'm going to help you. I'm not pushing you away, but I'm not listening to your shit. And I was like, oh wow, it hit me. Like, yeah.
I thought it was going to be kid glove, softly, come on. It was like, get in the car, douchebag. Like, you're going to take accountability for your behaviour, blah, blah, blah. And he was almost borderline confrontational with him. I loved it. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah. And again, you talk about probably how, in most situations, how awkward that would be when this is your mentor that you're taking that approach with. But yeah, he leans into it and he throws himself into it. I found it really uncomfortable when Jake's like arguing that he isn't wasted, and he so clearly is. And it's
I found really interesting, and it very much as a roller coaster of Jake looking great and talking about feeling great. You can tell when he's not. Something just changes in his face, and it's very much a roller coaster of up and down, up and down. But the thing I always found about Jake, he's just so heartbroken.
Yeah.
He's so broken mentally and emotionally. And he's not aggressive or anything like that when he's drunk.
No.
He's just really sad.
Yeah. And I think you get more of a fear about, it's not, they touch on this in it, I think, where they're talking about, are you only hurting yourself, not others? But they talk about, he's hurting people around him as well, but not physically. It's the emotional toll it's taken on the kids.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's very, it is a roller coaster's the right words. And then you get these moments where, he does an autograph signing in Vegas, and you're like, oh, this is surely a disaster waiting to happen. But he goes and gets tested when he's come back, and he's clean, and you're kind of feeling this sense of pride for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then he, is it just after talking about the relationship with his kids that seems to be improving, and then he gets a shoulder injury, and it seems to sort of knock the wind out of him because can't afford the surgery. And I found this bit quite emotional as well because they set up a crowdfunding for him to get the surgery. And I think it's like 24 hours after they check it. And is it 8,000 was their target or something like that?
Yeah.
And they've got almost all of it in a 24-hour period.
7, yep.
DDP telling them, look how much the people still care. Look how much these people care about you. And I found that quite emotional.
That's lovely.
Yeah. He starts...
for somebody that's been in the limelight and had celebrity, everybody knows who Jake the Snake is, really.
Yeah.
He doesn't think anything of himself. He has his self-esteem is, just completely in the toilet. For somebody like that to think that is quite mind-boggling.
Yeah. We get moments where Jake's talking about his dream being in the Royal Rumble. That's his goal. That's what he wants to achieve. And then does it go to? Is it Sean Waltman that I think has contacted DDP about Scott Hall?
About Scott Hall,
what they say? Yeah. And that was another thing that just made me think: is DDP just this go-to? Is it? Do people think things aren't good? Should I think maybe I'll contact DDP?
It's like Winston Wolfe. Bring in DDP.
Yeah. We'll see what he can do. Scott Hall and DDP had a long-standing relationship as well. And the way, I don't know, that DDP is just willing to, we'll make a call. We'll see
Bring
if we
him
can
on
help
board.
him. Yeah. And then like, wow.
I think I was maybe just sort of assuming this, but I think it was like, you're doing such a good job with Jake. We've seen
maybe that,
how he is. Can you help Scott as well, sort of thing?
Because obviously Waltman and Hall, big friends.
Yep.
So he's obviously, you'll be right about that. He's heard about what he's doing with Jake and thought, can he help Scott as well? He sounds horrendous on the call.
That
Scott
very
Hall.
first call they make, and he just says, "What?" on the phone.
Yeah.
And then it turns to, "Oh, Dally," and he's like, "Oh," and Jake's telling him about, he's 60 days sober or something like that. And there's like desperation in his voice, isn't there? Like, are you really, Jake? Are you really 60 days sober?
Yeah.
Quite heartbreaking that as well.
Yeah, and they talk Scott Hall into coming, and he is in absolutely horrendous. He's in a wheelchair.
I don't think I'd ever seen this footage of him in a wheelchair. His face is all bloated.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I found all the Scott Hall stuff a bit sad because of what happens to him a few years later. But just trying to stay in the moment of the documentary, I found there was something really jarring because you're then seeing, you've got Jake who's making progress in terms of the, doing the yoga and stuff like that, and he's getting a bit physically stronger and dropping weight and things like that. But seeing these guys that were these, Scott Hall was this incredible physical specimen, and it's like he can't stand. I found that pretty tough to see. He needs surgery on his hip. I think he's trying to move, and they're like, "Is that your hip?"
It's like a metronome.
Yeah, Yeah. Oh. Um, and it gets to a point where everything seemed to be going really positive, and I was like, you're just sort of waiting for a bad turn when that happens.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at the runtime that's left and thinking, well, it can't just be all good from here. But they talk about Jake getting into something called the Cauliflower Alley Club.
Yes.
And that seems like it's a big endorsement, a big achievement, being recognised to get voted into there.
You get the impression that it's just another sort of stamp of approval. This time, that crowdfunding thing is fans and people saying, we loved you, Jake. This is his peers recognising him, and you get the impression that he is sort of standing up there in front of his family, his kids, and sort of saying, like, I'm accepted by my peers as well. It felt like a big deal for him.
They did a pretty good job, I think, of like every now and then in the documentary they touched in with the family, like you had them talking about how the relationship was and things like that, and it's sort of telling the story of that is a huge part of this, as well as trying to get yourself sorted and physically back to a reasonable condition. It's also about trying to win that part of his life back as well.
Absolutely, and every now and again it'll go back to him and he'll talk about my dad was never there for football games or whatever, and I always said I would be there for this and I would be there for that, and I never was. And it comes back to that sort of self-loathing, and it just clearly means a lot to him to be able to, it seems like he spent a lot of time with his kids once he gets onto that path, which is lovely.
Unfortunately, we've then got DDP deciding he needs a bit of a break. Who can blame him for that? But he's gonna head off to Costa Rica.
He's packing that suitcase, and I text you said, "Please don't go away to Costa Rica."
So it's pretty much instant. Where Jake, it seems he's gone off the wagon after comments mocking him about his hair.
Scott Hall mocking him about his hair as well.
And it's so, like, you're left in no doubt. This just wouldn't have happened if DDP had been there. He is the person that Jake feels totally accountable to. So when when DDP's not there, it's a lot easier for him to lose control and fall off the wagon. And he's being called out by the director, and being sort of challenged to take is it antabuse? Is that what it's called? Which he pretends to take and actually throws down the sink. But you can tell he's out of it. And again, there's like it's a phone call I think to DDP, letting him know what's going on, and I'd like, it's this DDP guy.
He must just play motherfucker.
Yeah, I just came out of this with so much respect. Jake seems to start doing a bit better. They show him doing an acting role, and they tell the story about Scott Hall doing well enough to feel like he can move out, and he's going to be living near DDP with his son Cody. And Jake then feeling like he's ready to move out of the house. I think they reference him starting a podcast. I don't know that much came of that at the time. He's definitely got one now.
I think it's the same. Was it called the Snake Pit? Is it the same one?
Yeah, so he started one a couple of years ago with DDP initially, and it was called DDP's Snake Pit, and it was the two of them. But I think DDP just had too much on his schedule, so they transitioned to it just being a Jake one, which is pretty good for, like, you get some good old stories and
Jake's
things like that.
Jake's a good storyteller.
He is,
a natural storyteller. I was actually thinking that when they were showing him doing the filming of the movie, he's a natural actor as well.
Oh yeah. We get there's another setback from Jake. I think another thing this does pretty well is there's a very good explanation. I think Jake says it at a point in time. You're never cured of the addictions. You can be coping pretty well. You can be doing pretty well, but it's like every day there's that risk that you could fall off the wagon, and people are going to fall off the wagon. And I think they talk about more as, how you recover from that, how you get yourself back on track and things like that. And they showed him doing some indie shows, and obviously now the indie shows are going a hell of a lot better than they were at what we were seeing at the start
Yeah.
of the documentary.
And I think in a sort of Hollywood setting, this would be him with a six-pack, gorilla pressing and throwing people about, you know what I mean? But
Mhm.
physically, yes, he's a little bit more in shape, but he's still like a, 56-year-old man or something like that.
Yeah.
It's his demeanour and the way he's engaging with the fans, and it's just the same old Jake.
He's coherent. He can engage with people, and he can do what he's asked to do when he goes out there. Well, one thing I found interesting. This isn't the purpose of why we're doing this, but one thing I found pretty interesting is it comes up a couple of times. So we're going to get there's this old school Raw show that's going to be on.
Did this make you want to watch old school Raw? Do you ever remember watching? Because you
Not really.
watched, but nah. I didn't know it was a thing that they did. They had like the old set and stuff.
Yeah. So DDP is going to be on Old School Raw, and it seems to have been Triple H that calls him about an appearance on Old School Raw, and I'm thinking like back at this point in time that just struck me. I was like, it's Triple H doing the calls and getting people in, okay, and Jake turns up at the end as a surprise appearance. I think it was Ted DiBiase, who's an old friend of Jake's, was talking about the fact that I think DDP told him to stick around or something like that. And he's like, nah,
I'm done.
I'm going to get going. And he missed it. He missed Jake coming out as a complete surprise, unadvertised. And I think it was the Shield in the ring.
The Shield when Jake went in. I think they beat down Punk, and he came in and made the save.
Yeah. So pretty cool to see. He's gonna, have loved that moment. It seemed to have been a positive experience on Raw, and then we kind of moved from there to the big sell job, where Jake is acting pretty emotional with DDP, pretty disappointed, frustrated. He's had a call again from Hunter, who is telling him, he's not going to put him in the Rumble, and obviously that had been Jake's dream. And DDP, I think, is immediately trying to go to the positive, like, you had a good time on Raw, you're back in with the company, this is a good thing. And then Jake's sort of faking leaving the room, and he does that. Oh, but one more thing, he said, I'll see you at the Hall of Fame, you're going in. And that's a very nice moment. That was a good moment. And you find out pretty soon after that Scott Hall is also going to be put into the Hall of Fame in the same class. And I will forever love Scott Hall's sign off on his speech. Oh,
that's like cinema.
Oh yeah. Hard work pays off, dreams come true. Bad times don't last, but bad guys do. It just works, and it's perfect. Him delivering it. Yeah. So really sort of nice moment there where they've both gone into the Hall of Fame. They're both, in good graces of the company. They're not going to put somebody out there who they're, I think, worried about by that point in time in terms of what they might say or what they might do. So they've done enough to get to that stage where they're trusted in doing that. I think Jake talks about having had a brief interaction with Vince, which he was happy about at the time. I'm sure he tears into Vince on his podcast all the time.
Does he?
Yeah.
Oh, I need to give that a listen.
He's not shy about it at all. But yeah, Jake gives his speech and talks about the honour of having his family there and all that. So it was a really sort of nice, I thought, uplifting finale towards it.
Yeah.
As I said, the only thing that sort of went away from it, like Scott Hall, because it's it's sort of in your mind that he passed away.
So how long after, you might not know this, how long after this induction? So this was WrestleMania 30. They both got inducted, was it? I think it maybe was.
Right.
Which is Sting, Triple H, because the NWO do a running then, don't they? Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
I wonder the difference in did Scott Hall relapse? Is that what happened with the circumstances in passing away?
So I think the story that was told by Nash was that Hall had found lockdown incredibly difficult, because I think it was during COVID, and he basically didn't have any contact with anyone or anything like that. And I think he started drinking again, and then I think he fall and break his hip or something like that.
Yep.
And then I think he basically couldn't move. Yeah, and then I think by the time people found out, got to him, I think taken into hospital, and then maybe heart attacks. I think it might have been.
That all rings a bell. That's really, really sad.
Yeah.
And when you look at Jake obviously went on to, I don't know if he's still employed, but he went on to work in AEW.
Yeah, apparently got a new 1-year contract just a few weeks ago. Yeah.
Like, you just think, because they obviously worked through the pandemic, if Hall had been involved, if he'd been in either side, would that happen? Maybe no, who knows, I suppose. But like, concentrating on Jake, like I said earlier, his physical appearance when he became sober was just like really quite took me aback about just even the difference a haircut made to him.
Yeah.
He looked his age or younger. It was really, really uplifting to watch him on that upward curve. Really, really was. Hard not to smile watching it a lot of the time.
Yeah, because I think, like you say, when you compare what you saw at the start to what you saw at the end, and as I mentioned, you're never cured. It's never, going to be absolutely fine forever when you've gone through these addictions. But to have made the progress he made, and to now, have a job with AEW, to have a successful podcast, I think the only thing I maybe have a slight issue with, I don't know if he has anything at AEW that allows him to do this. This is a guy that, younger talent should be picking the brains of. They should be speaking to him and being like, I've got to deliver this promo. Have you any suggestion? Things like that. Yeah, he's such a there's not many people, I think, with this skill set, and this unique way that he delivers promos. And it's not to say you want anyone copying him, but he must have it, advice and guidance he could pass on.
Absolutely, but then if you listen to some of the podcasters and the analysts, that's the whole issue with that place in general, is that you had people like Regal and Jake and JR who were willing to give advice, and I think Regal and Danielson were basically hanging about in the ring waiting for people to come to them and to work with them, and people not really being interested in it, which is just crazy. But yeah, you're right about Jake, 100%. Like, the guy got the DDT over to the point where, like, when we were growing up, like, DDT was like, a shooting star press. Not even a shooting star press anymore, because that's not really that impressive anymore, but you know what I mean? Yeah. It's just devastating. I love a DDT even now because of Jake.
Yeah. I found myself kind of drawn to him even when, obviously as a younger viewer, you're supposed to like the good guys and dislike the bad guys, but there was something about him, even when he was the bad guy, when the angle he had where you would see like him unleashing a cobra on Savage and things like that, you're drawn to it. It's just got something different about, you believe there's something sinister there.
Yes. Especially in a
different
at the time, the era that was aimed towards kids, with over-the-top characters, cartoon-esque characters. He's like a psychopath, basically. Like a serial killer sort of vibe. Yeah, that should have worked for us, but...
Yeah, but it did.
Absolutely.
Yeah. He was telling a story about being signed by Vince, and basically being told, so I've got this idea for a character.
Oh, sorry. I think Sorry.
Oh, sorry. He told this story on his podcast about being signed by Vince, and he was talking about Vince saying to him, so what I want is like snakeskin boots, these, like, I think it was like purple trunks, and you're going to carry a snake to the ring. And Jake was like, no, I'm not your guy. And Vince apparently wrote a number down on a bit of paper and handed it to him. And Jake was like, oh, I am your guy.
Class. That's what I'm saying. He's such a good storyteller. I didn't think I realised he had the podcast until I watched this thing. It could be entertaining. The Joe Rogan episode with him is well worth a listen. He's got some really funny stories, but I'm sure it's things that he's talked about before. If you've never seen The Resurrection of Jake the Snake, I'd highly recommend it. Wrestling fan or not, I can't imagine you're not a wrestling fan, and somehow managed to listen to this podcast. But hi there, welcome. It's so good. I can't believe it's taken me until 9 years later to watch it, but I'm so glad that I held off, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Nice.
Definitely up there, and I think we've spoke about possibly watching Beyond the Mat as part of this little wrestle documentary that we're doing just now, and I just think after watching this, I don't think I would be keen to watch that at all actually anymore, just because of the way that it portrays Jake. Interesting. He said on Rogan that DDP had said to him, like, I know you've been burned in the past with documentaries. Let's film this thing. If you don't like it at the end, we don't put it out. So
Interesting.
He'd given him all that, and maybe that's why DDP is the way that he is. Yeah, and it's kind of like, this thing might not go anywhere, so I'm just going to be me. But just came away absolutely loving DDP.
Yeah, we all need a DDP in our lives, I think.
Absolutely. What a man, eh? What a man.
Yeah.
I mean, wrestling, if he'd never wrestled, he's made a bigger contribution to the sort of wrestling world than a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. Agreed.
So yeah, some good ones. Definitely some good ones to start us off with.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, enjoyed them both. Both quite emotional in different ways, but yeah.
And I did wonder, I was looking at what we planned on doing next, and I do wonder if we may end up in a situation of exhaustion of redemption, if you know what I mean. But what we're talking about looking at next, another double header, is You Cannot Kill David Arquette and Nail in the Coffin, The Fall and Rise of Vampiro.
Yeah.
Have you seen either of these?
I have seen David Arquette.
Oh, have you?
Yeah, maybe 3 years ago, something like that.
Ah, right, okay.
I would watch it again, and I've never really seen anything about Vampiro. I'm intrigued by that one. So
yeah, I've seen Arquette as well, and I really enjoyed it. It'd be interesting to see if it's just as enjoyable second time around. Never seen the Vampiro one. Is Vampiro, like, am I going to get my wrestlers mixed up? Is Vampiro the guy that we saw in WCW, and he was kind of like a gothic raven, and he like proper fucked his neck, taking a power bomb? Is it?
Yeah.
And I think he did. Maybe that's a different guy again. I think he did commentary in Lucha Underground, but then that could be a different guy again. Do you know if he did?
Okay. Yeah, not sure, but
either way,
I'm keen to watch it though, because he's obviously done a lot beyond what we saw in WCW, which wasn't very much.
No, he had a cool look though.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
That might not make it cut for much of a documentary. It's supposed to be a great documentary, so we'll see what it's like. So yeah, that's our first foray. Two great ones. I'll stick a link to The Resurrection of Jake the Snake in the bump of our of the podcast. So if you've not seen it, you can watch it.
Nice.
I highly recommend it.
Excellent.
So that's us, Adam.
Excellent. That was fun.
It was. I'm really glad that we started on those, and we'll look forward to what we've got next. So we're looking at the moment. We're looking at 4 episodes of documentaries, double headers each time.
Yep.
We'll see how we go. There may be other ones. If you are a big wrestling documentary fan and you follow us on Instagram at Outlaws Pod, feel free to send us some suggestions. That would be lovely.
Absolutely, yeah.
But otherwise, we'll speak in 2 weeks, and hopefully our backs don't pack in, or we could be doing this next one from a lying down position, or we could get into some serious DDP yoga.
That's my new life plan.
We'll be doing like handstands for the next one. Until then, take it easy. Please keep that beard. Don't shave. Please.
I'll try.
There's no try. This is what Yoda said. There is no try. Just do. All right. It looks amazing.
Thank you.
Right. Keep it real. See you in 2 weeks.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.